Testing one. Uh-oh. Are you ready to rock? No, sorry. iPhone? Sorry. Right. Some of you have seen me speak before. No two of my talks are ever the same. This is the first one that is fueled by two 7.5% Belgian beers. So I have no idea exactly what I'm going to say until I've already said it. And I wasn't worried about that until I saw my CEO about 30 seconds ago. So now I actually have to care what I say. Oops, never mind. The very nice organizers here offered to come up and introduce me. I said, well, you could do that, or I can make your life easier and I'll do it myself. So this guy's life is a little bit easier, but my life is a little more difficult. The topic that I wanted to speak to you about can't be seen because the sun is shining. If one of you can control the weather and bring in some clouds or something so you can read the displays, it would probably help. Otherwise, I will be reading a little bit of what you can see. Topic is the internet, or owned, whatever you want to say. How I learned to stop worrying and love the internet. Over the last 9 years that I've been at Access for All, almost a decade coming on, a lot of things have happened on the internet for security. Some good, some bad. Some of the most terrible things ever, such as government regulation, has come along and really taken a lot of the fun out of what it is we do. Now, as you can see, I'm sporting a somewhat fashionable hairstyle, and sometimes I joke that I used to have a full head of hair before I started doing computer security, and it's true. There's a lot of frustration in what I do, a lot of frustration in the work, in dealing sometimes with customers who have anti-clue. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is some of the things that we see, some of the things that we have to put up with as an ISP, and yet still remained happy and cheerful about the technology that I think most of you like. I can't promise this is going to be funny or interesting. We'll see. So, on with the show. My name is Scott A. McIntyre. I'm one of many McIntyres. I am Scott A. McIntyre. I am the security officer for Access for All Internet. I am one of 5 kernel members of KPN CERT. That's the Computer Emergency Response Team for all of KPN. I also sit on the board of directors of an organization known as FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. There's a couple of people here who are FIRST members. There's some of you who are KPN victims, and there's even more of you, I hope, who are Access for All customers. Yay. Yeah, there we go. So that's who I am. Unless you were planning on Kaminsky hacking me. How many of you are familiar with what I'm talking about? To what happened to poor Dan? Dan, are you here? Right. In which case, my name is Tim Kauk from Stichting Brain. Have fun. I won't ask if Tim is here. I really don't want to meet him. So, this is the foundation of my talk. I wanted to have a series of things to think about based upon the last decade of computer ISP security. Are people panicking about solving the wrong problems? I see people out there in the antivirus community and even in the incident response community forming war rooms and looking at every little attack and being ready to call the White House over the Twitter attack. I'm not making that up, right? There were people who were in discussion with the White House over Twitter getting a DDoS. When you read the press, you can understand why people might think that the sky is falling. Let me tell you, hello, it's not. It's definitely not. And I think that there's bigger and more ugly things to worry about. For example, supply chain security. I don't know how many of you were here for the talk before this one, which is talking about some of the low-level electrical engineering, some of the things that are happening at the firmware level. There's some great open source projects, but there's also a lot of unknowns that's happening inside of hardware. Do you know who programmed the firmware of your DSL modem, of the switch, of the network, of your access point? Do you know whether it's a good guy or a bad guy or who knows what? Oh, yes, I learned something else. Apparently, their camera can't see me if I stand over here. So there's a good chance that I might end up moving over here more just to annoy that guy who told me not to stand on this side of the line. So I wanted to say that in my job, I have had to accept that the internet, and I think all of you need to accept this as well, the internet is compromised. There's good guys, there's bad guys. What we need is more understanding of a Gestalt principle of and this is where I was going to tease you, almost a hippie-esque view of the internet, of looking at it as a whole, a holistic approach to understanding that security isn't just about the latest technology. It isn't about the latest patch or the best thing you can do to detect this type of exploit. You have to patch the meatware. So the theme of my talk is think about the people who are causing the problems. Think about the people who are trying to solve the problems, and don't just look for a bit of code that you can upload to make your problems go away, because I guarantee it doesn't work that way. You have to be responsible for your own actions. Right, so I have 108 slides, and this actually has full recursion. You can see the you are here, and it even points to a you are here. That took a while to build. It goes deeper. We're not going to cover all of this. We're going to jump around a little bit. As I say, I've only got technically an hour, and I've blown it just introducing myself for the last 10 minutes. 3 minutes and 2 seconds, actually. So it's been an interesting 4 years, the last 4 years since a congress like this. A lot's been happening on the internet. There's some great new technologies out there, a lot of cybercrime. I probably shouldn't ask this, and I'd be surprised if anybody raises your hand. Has anybody here been a victim of computer crime? Thank you for raising your hand for other people who you're sitting next to aren't. I'm lucky so far that I don't know if I have, and I think that's one of the problems. When you look at some of the really clever attacks that are taking place today, man-in-the-middle attacks, SSL hijacking, some of the tools that have been announced in public but no doubt used in private from DEF CON last week, from Black Hat sessions, there's a lot of risks out there. And everyone and everything is an interesting target these days. And cloud computing, I think we've all heard about that. That's something that makes me, well, wake up in horrible sweats in the middle of the night, and not just because I had a little too much to drink. It really is a horrible thing to think about for trying to secure. So what are we going to try to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about what it is that I do over the last few years, the things that keep me really busy, the things to think about, things to worry about. And if you have ever heard me speak before, one of the constant criticisms that I have heard is, Scott, you've made us feel this horrendous feeling of despair. We're doomed. Yeah, it does. And I really wish that you could see this because it's much funnier when you can actually read it. It's always darkest just before it goes pitch black. And I don't know if that's where we are with internet security or not. I sometimes think we are. Lately, there's been some interesting questions, and we will eventually get to the end. Unfortunately, the person who speaks after me, if you're in the room, you're doomed. But as we get to the end, I had a really interesting conversation with a good friend of mine who is pretty much the representative sample of the people who would never attend an event like this. But that's the people we have to help. Those are the standard customers. That's the majority of people on the internet today. We'll get there eventually. So, what is it I do all day? Well, it's actually fairly simple. At least that's what I'm accused of by the marketing and sales department. They don't like this whole, oh, he turns things off. Well, it's not quite that simple. There's a lot more to it. Actually, in reality, the big picture of what I do all day looks a little bit like this. There's a whole bunch of types of information that as a security guy, you have to aggregate in an ISP. You've got people reporting things to abuse addresses. You've got your own detection algorithms. You've got your own software, hardware, things you've kludged together, bits of Perl written by some of my very clever colleagues that are in the room. Actually, I'm not sure if we have any Python, so I can't blame you, Thomas. I'll say yes because he does write Python. Someone has to. And taking all that is part of the daily routine and figuring out, okay, what's a real threat? What affects the business? What affects the customers? To what level? What scale? How worried should I be? Versus, okay, this is business as usual. And a lot of it is business as usual. I just cannot get worked up over every little thing that some customer may have for a bit of malware. And knowing whether it's version Alpha 7 or version ZZ of this backdoor Trojan doesn't matter so much as fixing the underlying program and the underlying problem, which is patching the meatware of the customer that got infected. Another way of looking at my day, again, if you could see this, you can see it a little bit better over there. These are security incidents that I am aware of on a daily basis. This is actually the last month of security incidents at Access for All. Not just incidents, but these are fairly large attacks, network attacks, DDoS events, SSH, brute force attacks, SIP exploits, things like that. As you can see, and I don't have a laser pointer with me, I didn't bring anything electronic with me because I don't trust you. No offense. no Wi-Fi, my iPhone is turned off. Yeah, it was some guy who was sitting out here, and I don't know what he's going to do with it. Anyway, what's been interesting about this graph is the last 2 weeks or so, it got really quiet. That's because all of our customers went on holiday. Right? They go on vacancy, and suddenly the DDoS targets, the victims, in some cases the sources of the attacks, go with them. And it's been really interesting. It shows very much in a clear thing. Indeed, one of my colleagues, Bert and I, were discussing it just a week or so ago, saying, hey, is it just me or has it gone quiet? It won't last. Don't worry. So what I really do all day is process 345 some odd thousand security incidents over 13,000 customers across KPN, and that's on a monthly basis. That's an average amount. I get reports, I'm aware of incidents, customers on botnets, customers causing attacks, customers being the source of evil, being the destination of evil, whatever. Make sure that all the different KPN providers get that information on a daily basis, including Access for All. That doesn't include the attacks that you just saw on the slide before that. Try to do my best to work with compliance issues, regulatory issues. The government sucks. And dealing with the various problems that occur there. And of course, I drink way too much coffee. Not quite enough alcohol. And apparently this is water, but I don't know. So why do we do it? Well, from our point of view as an ISP, you have to run a clean network. If you don't, your network gets in one way or another blacklisted. Now, whether this be a DNS-based list or a URL-based list, as you see, more and more web browsers have built-in functionality to block access to websites. Then obviously it's a key issue. It's of real concern to make sure that your customers' websites are not contributing to the evil on the internet. And we've actually had more than one customer come up to us or send us emails saying, hey, I can't get to my own website hosted at Access for All. And we say, oh, really? Why is that? And I say, well, there's a security alert that comes up in IE, or comes up in Firefox, or Safari. They all do it. So we go and look. Sure enough, the customers had their access credentials stolen. There's a malicious iframe pointing to some website in China, and a bit of odd PHP doing some other evil. And we'll get into that in a little while. And also we have to worry about provider-wide filters. The last thing we want is for our ASN to be blocked by the internet. Now, of course, there are some who advocate this approach, including me, for certain countries. You can read the line, I won't say it, but hi, if you're in the room. So, one other comment, a fact of life I have learned, and this sounds horrendous, but believe me, if you had to deal with our customer phone calls, the number of times that it turns out that there's all this unknown traffic to these places that end with IA, Romania, Albania, Macedonia, Russia, I don't know. So it's a bit of a pessimistic view, but anyway, moving on. So dealing with all of this, I obviously need a really powerful tool. 30 milligrams of codeine. Oh, that one's only 12.5, 12.8. The good stuff is 30. These are the things that have given me the most headaches over the last couple of months, the last couple of years. It's funny, we were actually having a conversation in the car on the way down here about password and password strength, and I was kind of giggling, because at the end of the day, I think that most of us in this room realize it doesn't matter how good your password is if you've got a keyboard logger running on the victim's computer. Or if they have other malware which is intercepting the network traffic, your password can be as cryptographically secure as the one versus Wachtwoord that I've got up there, and it just doesn't matter. But to be honest, the bad guys don't even need that. At the moment, a lot of passwords are brute forceable. The number of people who use geheim as their password, secret. They use their first name as their password. They use their surname as their password. Fixing that problem isn't something that just technology is responsible for, because even with the really secure passwords, people are still being compromised. We had a case just this morning, as I was heading down here today, where a customer was finding that their site kept being remotely compromised. And it took a while to dig into the logs, and it turned out there's a bunch of FTP logins from Spain and Germany and Russia, and they were uploading malicious content, malicious Perl scripts, that were then being used to install spamware on side of our web servers. And it was because the customer typed their password at an internet cafe on holiday in Italy. Right? You type it there, malware's running on that computer, says thank you very much, has the access credentials, next thing you know, they're hacking our websites. Ick. So there are solutions for some of these problems. There's excellent password management utilities out there. Just want to highlight some of the big headaches. Something that I'm sure some of you in the room are using at the moment, wireless. Open Wi-Fi, big headache. The number of times we've had customers who say, well, there's no other possible explanation. All right, I'm going to annoy the camera guy again, sorry. There's no other, oh, he's figuring out how to work around this. He's quick. Now that annoys the audio guys. They're nice to me. But if you keep moving, then he can't move the camera quick enough. I like this. So open Wi-Fi is a real problem for us. We hear a number of customers who keep saying, hey, we have patched everything on our network. There is nothing open. Oh, but we did have this Wi-Fi. And we've left it open because we're hippies. Damn hippies. And we want it to be open to the internet. We want to share our connection with the world. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Now, I don't normally actually cite terrorism as a cause or a problem in the real world. I think that is really one of the top two excuses for almost doing any form of stupid government legislation. One, terrorism. Two, child pornography. I think we all know that. You can get away with anything if you say it blocks or stops those two things. But there have been some cases that are a little troubling. In Pakistan last year, some guys were picked up and arrested by the Pakistani government, thrown into jail, not really given much of a chance to explain themselves, and it turned out the various terrorist threats that were being originated from their IP address was because they did have an open Wi-Fi thing. One case in a country that's not yet like Pakistan, but it does show that there is a risk. There is a real risk there. So if you're going to be running wireless, make sure you do the smart stuff. Do an 802.11n if you can. That's kind of cool. WPA2, use secure keys, do MAC locking, check your network, do some auditing. Don't just trust that your neighbors are nice people, because it turns out they're not. Another big problem we've had, DNS changer malware. This is software that controls your machine, changes where your DNS server is, comes back with a different answer. This is wonderful for man-in-the-middle attacks, phishing attacks, because it's transparent to you. From your point of view, you're going to www.ingbank.nl, and it looks right. You've got a certificate. It might even be an extended validation certified one, but because of DNS being manipulated, and because you can't trust it, everything breaks down from there. We've seen a lot of customers being affected by DNS changer malware. This is a whole bunch of different customers that are all querying. Every single DNS query they make is going off to a network in Russia. Now, not just is that bad because it means they're obviously compromised, but the performance of that means that every web click has to go off to Russia, network latency, come back, and eventually come back with the answer. It's a real problem that we see. Drive-by downloads, another headache. I don't know how much interest there is. I've got a couple of topics that I can kind of go off into now. I've got something where we can talk in depth about JavaScript, iframe, exploits, the problems that we see as a provider in a case study. Or I can go into DNS amplification attacks, or I can do both and really screw the next guy who has to talk. Show of hands, that was probably the next guy. Show of hands, who wants me to talk more about iframes? Not a lot, which means most of you are iframe authors. So we'll kind of zip through this. We have a real problem with customers who have hosted websites with malicious iframes that are installed. And this is an example case that came along a couple of months ago. Customer had their htaccess file modified. The index.html was changed to include the malicious iframe. Do you know what I mean with malicious iframe? Doesn't matter. I'm going to keep talking. Turns out that the customer's compromise was actually on their PC from which their content management software was running. And every single time they would do an FTP upload of their site, the malware on the computer in their office would automatically say, oh look, here is an FTP put of an index.html or HTML file. I'll go ahead and include this less than iframe blah 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 automatically. So when the good guy looks at his computer in his office, the code is clean. Yet when we look on our server, it's compromised. Literally during the FTP session, the malware injected the iframe. And this is an incredibly common insertion of iframes at the moment. This is what the htaccess looked like. You can kind of figure out who was behind this kit. Those of you who read these things, I hope, Thomas, you get this, if you're still here. Nope, he left. Oh, no, there you are. You can read that, right? It's an Apache thing. So what was happening here was basically every time somebody was sent to this website from a refer request from a search engine matching any of those regular expressions, then it would automatically rewrite it and send things off to a certain IP address and a certain domain in Russia in order to download more malware. So that same site also came with a JavaScript that looked a bit like this, slightly obfuscated. I do not find this human readable. I'm sure there's at least 5 or 6 of you in this room who do. After the first level of deobfuscation, you get a little bit closer. Now it's just escape. Now I can understand it a little bit more. I definitely know that there's some JavaScript that's going on there. I have a little bit more to work with. Run it through another decoder. Ah, there we go. Now we've got some information. We can see that the JavaScript, it was an iframe to a JavaScript that had more JavaScript that went to another iframe to pull in the data from that particular location. Ah, fine. Someone go take a look at that. So when you go to that location and look at the malware, what the bad guys did was actually modify the 403 forbidden document to return more malware rather than actually having to host the malware on the server. Now, if you followed that, you're definitely at the right conference and the right talk. But the long and the short of it is the bad guy modified the way the web server was returning error codes, or forbidden in this case. So all he had to do was point to any URL which was not going to be able to be accessed, and the malware would be returned just like that, which made it really frustrating for the other side to figure out, because he goes looking for the .diff go.php. Ain't there, right? It's just not there. Doesn't have to be. And of course, this led to the malware, and this was more information about the site. As you can see, that same website was filled with several different exploits, ActiveX, JavaScript, PDF, 0 days. There's a number of things you can do about it. Some of these are realistic, some of them are not. Turning off JavaScript entirely leads to a really interesting internet experience these days. I don't know how many of you believe in the myth of Web 2.0, but all of you twits that are into twitting, no doubt, would probably find it not nearly as interesting. Some of these you can do, some you can't. Certainly I recommend NoScript if you can use it inside of Firefox. Right, social engineering. I understand that more than one of you are at this event right now because you socially engineered your way in past the organizers. Hands up if you did that. Ah, well, we only had one person actually admit to it. Organizers? No, just kidding. So social engineering and that problem is something that's really been affecting our customer base, and you can understand why. You receive an email that says, click here to see Angelina Jolie doing something interesting with a watermelon. I'll click. And next thing you know, it says, oh, you got to install this codec. Well, most of our customers don't know what a codec is, much less how to spell it. And so what do? They do what they think they must to get what they want. They want to see Angelina Jolie with a watermelon, darn it. And they're going to install the codec if that's what gets it to them. Doesn't work that way, guys. So social engineering attacks are incredibly popular at the moment. And a lot of these are being propagated through MSN, chat system, Hives, Facebook, the popular environments. Why? That's where the masses are, who probably aren't terribly well secured, and very easy Rich Pickens targets. And then you can get into more advanced social engineering, and we'll talk about that in a minute. This is a great example of social engineering that came out a couple of, beginning of the year, 24th of February. Jack Straw from the UK Justice Secretary, he admitted that his webmail account was compromised by Nigerians that were then using that saying, hi, I'm Jack Straw, I need help. And so everything looked completely valid, and his point was that at least it wasn't his ministerial account, it was his account associated with where he's a minister of parliament from. And so he says, yeah, but at least it's okay, you know, it's not my main account, it's another account, so it's all right. And I think, I don't know if it says, I started getting phone calls from various constituents asking if I was really in Nigeria and really needed $3,000. So there were a number of people at least who had enough doubt to say, is this possible, is this true? So it made it past the first filter right away. We're going to zip through this one. How many people here build web applications? Okay, quite a few. How many of you actually understand how to secure web applications? Well, I don't believe you. So web application security, you think that, but web application security is a real minefield at the moment. Anybody who builds a web app has to have a completely different mindset in order to properly secure it. Doing positive input validation, doing protections against SQL injection, to do the types of things you need to do, you have to think about alternative use case scenarios or abuse case scenarios which actually protect your business and your customers' data. And that's not always easy. You have to think about, and you can't see this right here, there's a whole layer of things that are involved. Think about the hardware, the machine, the boot records, the operating system, applications, all dependencies, all libraries. You're using PHP, it's got built-in libraries, it's got all this other stuff going, extra plugins you've done, plus the user code that you've installed as well. So actually securing a web app isn't just about making sure your PHP looks right. There's a lot more behind it. Right, server security. Yeah, this goes on with the web app stuff. Right now, actually, there's a really good effort by several of the search engines, especially Google, and I don't know if there's anybody working here from Google, but several of the search engines are now trying to tell you in advance if the website that you've searched for might contain malicious code. And there was a fantastic example of this a couple of weeks ago, where Google returned one of the most malicious web code distribution points on the internet. Microsoft Corporation. It was an oops on their part, but basically any query that you put into Google would say this site is considered harmful, don't click on it. Now, people kind of laugh this off on the internet, isn't that funny? Of course, the first thing I did was that query and make a screenshot for presentations, but the power that Google has over what site is safe and what site is not safe is something that we all need to think about. Is this too much power? Is it the right amount of power? Are they doing good, or have they gone just that little bit extra further? I'm going to skip this. It's kind of interesting, but we don't have time, really. This is the this is a sample of malicious URLs that are injected into our customers' websites every single day. I get about between 500 to 700 remote websites that have also been compromised, and those sites, therefore, are hosting malicious code, whether it be Perl bots, Windows executables, doesn't really matter. All of this stuff is injected into our customer websites in order to try to gain access or distribute malicious code. And I've even graphed this. Oops, sorry. That. You can see that there's a certain pattern over the course of the day as these web application security scanners with bad guys look for our customers. What they do is they essentially use Google to find websites that are running packages they know are vulnerable. So you say, look for NURL, this PHPBB, and look for this version string, and you get a nice long list of all of the websites which are likely compromisable if you're a website hacker. And this is the kind of malware they inject. I only included this in here for the really nice long list of features that this malicious code gives to the guy who injects it into your website. There's the SQL injection, RFI, LFI, code execution, various types of mass scanners using different domains, integrated shell, and all sorts of other features. And this is running on Unix. It's a bit of PHP. So it's not just Windows which has the issue here. And obviously, the bad guys know that they're onto a good thing. When you look at last year, 2007 versus 2008, the number of injected websites that we see has skyrocketed. I wanted to very briefly talk about OWASP. Who is here familiar with OWASP? Oh, that makes me feel good. We can kind of skip this. If you are doing any kind of web application security, look into WebGoat. It's a self-contained package. It can run off of a boot CD. Can run off of boot ISO. Actually, I've got an image on it for VMware, and it steps you through web application security for SQL injection, cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting, about 15, 20 different sections and subsections where you get to step through the exercises of what the bad guys are doing. Now, this is something that is difficult to obviously do for every company, but if you're building websites for people and you're not aware of how they can be misused and abused, you're doing a disservice to your customers. So if you're an application programmer, look at these types of tools. They're free, that's why I throw them on there. Now, I always get asked, do you still get DDoSes? You know, DDoSes were kind of a thing of the past, some people say. The press is saying that DDoSes aren't nearly as popular. Yeah, not quite true. They're still incredibly popular. We get dozens per day. As a matter of fact, if I don't see a DDoS, I start to wonder if there's a problem with our internet connection. It's just wrong. It's like way too silent. Actually, this happened last week, and this is because of the vacancy time, right? Last week, I saw almost 20 hours without a single DDoS. That has never happened in the years that I've been at Access for All. And I got very worried. I was logging onto all of the routers. I was checking all the logs. Is there a problem with appearing? What's broken? And literally just about the time I did that, we got a few million packets per second to an IRC server. Oh, good, everything's okay. Thanks, Romania. So it's sad that you have to see the internet that way. And I don't know if I can say this in public, and I'm sorry no, I don't think this is breaking any privacy things, but we don't have any privacy experts here, do we? One of our customers operates a very popular website for showing you radar images of the weather. I don't need to name them. Traceroute will tell you if you figure out who it is, so this isn't a privacy thing. But what is funny for me is that whenever you lot, the locals, think, is it good weather to go sit outside on a terrace? The first thing you do is go and check this website. And that looks like a DDoS from our system's point of view. So you can see around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this incredible rush of traffic to this weather radar website, thinking, is it good enough to go sit outside? Can we sit outside? You get a little bit in the morning before the morning commute, but in the afternoon, this is how I know if the weather is good or bad. I don't have to look outside. If I get a DDoS alert, enough people are concerned, which means it's overcast and probably going to rain. So, in the end, yes, we get DDoSes. Yes, a couple of gigabits here and there, a few 100,000 packets per second here or there. This is 1.57 million packets per second at 2.83 gigabits per second. This was interesting. This was against a colo customer who was probably in the room. What happened was, I'm kidding, they're not. I made sure of that. He's in a grave, a shallow one in a desert community. But they had an SSH brute force compromise to their server at Access for All. The bad guys then launched attacks against others, and those people said, well, screw you, and attacked our customer as the source of the attacks. And so our guy was kind of an innocent third party, but this is an incredibly common thing to have happen for us. DNS amplification attacks. Any interest? Shall I skip it? There's a couple of hands. We're going to talk about it. It's kind of interesting, mostly because one of the biggest problems that we're seeing as a provider is that this is actually being caused by, do I even put it there? Obviously, open forwarding and recursive servers of some type, embedded systems, modems, devices that are a living nightmare to upgrade, if they're upgradable at all. But they've got a DNS proxy listening on the WAN port that takes any request from the internet, and we're going to come back on what this means in a minute and why it's a problem, and then go ahead and answer it for whoever makes the query, or appears to. So this is something that causes us a real problem. It leads to some massive DDoS attacks. One of the more recent ones last week was over 40 gigabits per second of traffic. That's a lot. That sucks when you receive that. That makes the light not blink, just stays on. And we really need to have this fixed, and fixing it isn't easy. So this is the way a DDoS amplification or DNS amplification attack works. So the bad guy has control over a number of bots on systems. This is trivial. You can go to eBay and buy bots. It's not a difficult thing to get. And they go ahead and they send a spoofed request. It's UDP, easy to spoof. Not a lot of providers have egress filters, which means that I can pretend to be his ISP. Oh, wait, you're one of my customers, aren't you? No, you're not. You should be. So if you don't have egress filtering, it's trivial for me to be somebody else. And I send this UDP packet out, and I say, go ahead, guys, answer this text query for me for this domain that I control. I control evil.com. I'm the evil mastermind with my island. I'm still working on that part. And I make this request for a text field or a DNSSEC certificate or an IPv6 record, anything which is larger in response to the size of the query I made, thus amplifying the size of the response. If I send a 53-byte request and I get 4 kilobytes in return, that's an excellent investment strategy. If only Wall Street would have followed that for the last 2 years. So they send these spoofed requests using the victim address, the person they want to receive the attack, as the source of the request to these open resolvers. This might be a modem, might be a DSL box, might be a colo box, could be all sorts of things. Those things then say, okay, fine, I'll go talk to .com, I'll find out who's in charge of evil.com, if they don't already have it cached, or talk to their authoritative resolver for the ISP, get the answer to that. They then go ahead and get that text record for evil.com, and then they go ahead and return that, regardless of the size, to the spoofed IP address which sent them the request. So a lot of these other requests in the top on the right might be going via our server. So our customer with a DSL modem, which is running firmware that is older than, well, most of you, that request goes out, comes back with a 4 kilobyte response packet and goes off to the victim IP address. And if you do that, even at a fairly slow data rate, but you do it times a few 100,000 machines, that's what, or even a few thousand machines, that's what builds up to some really powerful attacks. And you can do the math yourself. Just depending upon the type of customer, co-location, DSL, whatever, just a few packets per second can easily equal a very, very, very large attack. So, I have been talking for 31 minutes, which is about halfway technically, and I'm on slide 54 of 109. How's that? Bots and botnets. Are there any interest in that, or shall I move on to ranting about something else? Bots? Okay, we'll do a little bit on bots. We'll zip through. I wanted to talk about two particular botnets because the organizers asked me to. They wanted me to talk about Conficker. I wanted to talk a little about Srisby, just because it was highly publicized last year. He says 15 minutes. That's nice, pat, pat. Is he funny? So Srisby was interesting. It's on Wikipedia. It must be true. You can find out more about it there. It had all sorts of interesting things, hundreds of thousands of infections, responsible. It was considered to be the largest spam cannon. Oh, good, they're talking about the fact that I keep annoying them on the camera. It was considered to be one of the largest spam cannon. And what interesting for the Python community there, Thomas, the phone home aspect, the controller of this botnet was actually based on Python, the reactor mailer system. And this was an interesting piece of malware that got really popular. It was a rootkit, really tough to find. It actually was invisible because of the way it attached to the drivers within the operating system and the network drivers themselves, so that if you tried to do like a TCP dump, you couldn't see it because you were using the normal network drivers from Windows, and it was basically told to hide the fact that it was phoning home and to hide the spam it was sending out. So you needed an independent way of verifying that your system was compromised. And initial versions were all fixed IP address to McCullough. And that's why I wanted to mention, this was a big thing in the news at the end of last year, that McCullough was taken down by the good guys. And I was a part of that, and that's why I wanted to mention this. It was great, it was interesting to take it down. The malware itself cost about $500, incredibly cheap, and this is what gets installed on the Windows PC. And like I said earlier, the fake video codec social engineering was its main way of spreading and getting people interested. And then the phone home to the msiesettings.com, which is an iframe affiliate site, so there was a profit motive. I won't go into how the affiliate profit thing works, but it's a way of making money. These were some of the sites that were compromised. As you can see, quite a few, including several government sites in various countries around the world that actually had the websites that were compromised with the iframe. So these are the numbers of the botnet. When we did the takedown of the botnet, myself and some antivirus researchers, we basically ran a botpot and took over the botnet and did some measurement, find out how big it was, and then send notifications out to providers saying, your customers have a problem. In some cases, our customers have a problem. We had about 145,000 systems the first day, unique. And just over the course of that particular week in November, you can see the number of types of connections to our botpot. HTTP, and over 2 million for IRC. But when McCullough went away, because of the efforts of the incident response community, we had something that looked a bit like this. McCullough gets turned off, the botnet gets incredibly busy, but then McCullough got turned back on because of a Dutch provider who made an oops. And it wasn't us. That provider ended up providing transit connections to the IP addresses that McCullough was running, and the botnet went back on. So the McCullough goes off, and our botnet gets populated by all the infected systems, and the McCullough comes back on, and you can see the numbers just dove right off. In terms of spam effect, you can see towards the beginning of the week there, that's when we acted, was over the weekend. It was on a Sunday. And then on the Monday, these are the spam rates at Access for All, the percentage of incoming mail that's spam. And as you can see, it did take a hit, but there's still a heck of a lot more orange out there than there is white. And by the end of the year, the numbers were pretty much back to normal, and certainly right now they are as high as ever, if not higher, for spam. Conficker, you've heard of Conficker? I barely care about Conficker anymore, but it made a lot of press, so we're going to talk about it briefly. It didn't do a lot, but the really interesting thing about Conficker was that it exploited something for which there was a well-publicized patch that was easy to fix. If you had MS-0867 installed from last year, you would have been protected from the major source of compromise of Conficker. If you didn't have an administrator password, which was admin, you would be protected from Conficker. And where you have seen the most number of infections have been in corporate desktop environments, where they run a managed environment, and for whatever reason, the IT guys were scared to push the button on a Microsoft update and patch. Those of you who work on those environments probably know what I'm talking about. The IT guys hate having to do a big software update because of what might break. So what we have found in talking with our customers is that a lot of the people who were compromised by it, did I even mention this? Yeah. A lot of the people who were compromised because of VPNs. So a laptop, Road Warrior, the malware spreads over the VPN, which is behind the firewall, spreads across the corporate network, and the thousands of desktop machines, which are all running exactly the same version of Windows with the same crappy patch levels, all get instantly compromised. Easy. So that's why Conficker has been the success it has been. There's been an incredible effort on the part of the good guy community, the white hats, to try to analyze this, to understand it. It had a number of firsts, especially cryptographic firsts. Some of the cryptographic algorithms used in Conficker were absolutely fascinating, which showed that the evolution of malware is definitely an issue that we as an ISP have to kind of sort of worry about. But by thinking about this too much, again, you get sidetracked. This is fascinating stuff. And I'm sure there are people here who are thinking, God, I would love to look at the source code. I would love to understand this. I'd like to look at the crypto stuff. And that's fine, but that doesn't really fix the source of the cause of the problem. It doesn't really fix the actual solution of making sure that this guy doesn't click on a link, right? And that's the problem that I have to start thinking about. Back in February, the percentage of people that were infected, Russia, China, Netherlands, was way down there. A couple of weeks ago, looking through July rather, numbers pretty much the same. The number of daily infections, kind of bad. Comes up to about 4.7 million unique systems around the internet. And it's actually a little bit more when you start looking behind that, and that's something you can do with Conficker, but that's another story. And technically I've got 7 minutes, so I'm going to skip ahead. And I'm going to talk a little bit briefly now about clouds. Do you get the joke? Yeah, it wasn't very good, but I must say I had a couple of bottles of wine at that point. So cloud security, I don't know how many of you are using cloud systems, but these are questions that you should think about. Certainly, Google is evil. Kidding. Yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah, sure, you're funny. Where is your data? What are the regulatory oversight and impacts of where that data is located? Who has access to the information? Is it encrypted? Can it be decrypted? Who's got keys? Is there a key escrow? Is there somebody else able to access your data somewhere on the internet? Are you obeying the laws of your country or of somebody else's country? And this is why I personally really don't find these things very comfortable. The United States has a horrendous track record over the last 8 years for invading privacy. And it is a little worrying to think about large data centers being built with email and personal information of Dutch companies who are bound by Dutch laws, but the information being somewhere else. I don't know what the regulatory issues are there, but I'm pretty sure that you don't escape them simply by having your data offshore. Clouds, in a way, for me also, and some of you in the room are old enough, it's like mainframes, right? Everybody's got a VT100 on their desk again, and you've got a dumb terminal you sit in front of, but all the really interesting stuff happens somewhere far away. I don't know why people are so comfortable with that, but again, I just want to throw it out there. Think about it. Think about where your data is. Think about being able to answer the questions if an auditor comes in, or the police, or your boss, and says, hey, where's that document? And you have to say, well, it's in the cloud. Yeah, but where is that document? You can't answer. Think about it. Great examples of how this has gone wrong. I'm sure most of you have heard about Amazon's Kindle 1984 gaffe of about 3 weeks ago, where Amazon basically screwed up the DRM mechanism and basically said, oh, they really can't have that, and they removed content from every Kindle that had already purchased 1984. They remotely did that on your Kindle if you had one. They reached right out and said, oh, we'll take that back, thank you very much. Clouds. And of course the Patriot Act. And a wonderful example of about 3 weeks ago, Twitter had their corporate information leaked. And this is a beautiful hack. The bad guy, realized that one of the people who worked in the administrative department of Twitter had a particular Gmail account and a Google account. That Google account, obviously, if Twitter uses a lot of cloud services from Google, would be really interesting to gain access to. So that person, on a more or less hunch, went to Hotmail and registered the account, because it turns out the person who created it at Google had set up Hotmail account first, and that was the alternative email address that Google used in order to contact this person for password resets, for example. So the hack was fairly simple. Go to Hotmail, register Fooblah. Go to Google and say, I forgot my password, my name is Fooblah, send it to my alternative account. And that goes over to the Hotmail address. Now they have access to the Gmail account. They're able to read the emails, figure out what the password was, reset it so that the person who was hacked never knew that they were hacked, and read all of the corporate documents, plans, provisioning, details, numbers, money related to Twitter. Clever and easy, and didn't take a keyboard logger, but took the security systems of cloud computing and used them to their own advantage. Think about these types of things. I mentioned earlier about supply chain security. There was a great example of this a couple of weeks ago in July, where BlackBerry, Crackberry, pushed out an update in the United Arab Emirates that included keyboard logging, essentially a Trojan, that logged everything that your phone was doing and sent it off to the government. And that was a remote pushed upgrade that you had no control over. And the only reason people detected it was to notice that the battery drain was significantly increased and the modem, the radio, seemed to be working a lot harder than normal. Good. I have exactly 3 minutes and I'm on the right point of where I wanted to talk about. Right. Hands up if you're a police officer. Worth a shot. I noticed a number of people grabbed their cameras. So, this is the political part, and this is the part that probably my CEO would have loved to know I'm going to talk about beforehand. Bummer. So one of the biggest threats that I see on the horizon right now for the ISP and you as a customer is the overregulation, which is coming out of a lot of different markets. Non-proportional invasion of your privacy, of our work methods, of the things that we want to build and deploy for you. Data retention. The original problem of data retention, I'll get back to that in a moment, was an admirable one to try to solve, but the way it's being done is ridiculous. Tapping, internet tapping, aftappen, whatever you want to call it, that is really stifling the internet community, especially in the Netherlands. Other countries have different rules, some it's easier. We are obligated to make sure any service that we make or sell to you is completely tappable, unencrypted, or hand over the encryption keys to the government. That sucks. That really sucks. And I wish that more people cared about this in some passionate way and would do something about it, because it's definitely not proportional to the risks that are out there. Thank you. And I joke a lot, and I don't know if Marco's in the room. Marco, are you here? I thought I heard you earlier. Marco is probably our guru of IPv6, and I jest a lot, IPv6 sucks. Oh, there he is. IPv6 doesn't really suck. It doesn't solve the problems of IPv4, and as we all know, implementing it isn't just click on done. But he'll talk about that tomorrow, I believe. And he's got great wisdom there. But one of the things that he and I have tension over is I've got these government regulators coming along and saying, you can't do it until it can be tapped and intercepted and everything gets sucked off onto the government's computers and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, that sucks. That's not the way the internet is developed. We are going to be years and years, perhaps decades ahead of the capabilities of the government to receive this type of data, but they're forcing us to move at their pace, to slow things down, and to just make it unworkable. But anyway, I rant. Data retention. Right? I wanted to speak briefly about this one. The original goal made sense. Law officer in this country tracking, for a very good reason, a bad guy in this country. And he says, hey, police officer, we have a mutual understanding that you will exchange data. Could you tell me where I can go to a door and knock on, because this is what it's all about. The police think in terms of doors they can knock on. Where can I find the guy who used this IP address 8 months ago? And depending upon the laws of that country, there's absolutely no idea whether or not that information is retained. So the original European legislation was fairly simple and made sense. Retain that which you have and have generated through automated or manual processes for a period of between X and Y amount of time. Well, that's where it starts to get ugly, between X and Y. And that's up to every member state to define. Some countries are doing 6, some are doing 24 months. So the original purpose isn't being solved, which means a police officer still can't get the question answered by going to another country, because you don't know if they're going to have it. You still, as a law enforcement person, have to work more quickly. You have to change the way you work. The problem is that the way and the amount of information that's required to be retained is phenomenal. It's not as bad as some of the press has said. For example, my last point, it's not URLs, that's content. The legislation prohibits retention of content. So what website you go to isn't logged. IP address is not logged in the Netherlands. In the United Kingdom, it's a slightly different environment. But here in this country, we do not log what websites you visit or what IP addresses you go to. That's not covered. It is email tos and froms, and what IP address delivered us an email. So they could figure out basic social networks. Who do you know? Who do you mail? And so on. Call detail records from VoIP. Who did you call? When did you call them? And for how long did you call them? So it is a potential invasion of privacy. Is it proportional? I don't know. Personally, I don't think so. I don't think this is a proportional solution to the problem that's out there. And then I read stories like this. This has been a fairly popular one. Any journalists that are here, please talk to the guy next to you. Get PGP. Don't let your communications be intercepted. Make it really difficult for the police to intercept and figure out what you're talking about. And then next to finally, lawful interception. You think it's bad now with the laws, and I think a lot of you know what the rules are in this country, but these are some of the things they're looking at down the road. Tapping based upon envelope from. Those of you who understand how email works, or who have ever received a spam message, will realize how stupid this is. What it boils down to is the government would love it if a provider can say, oh yes, foobar@gmail.com sent an email from the Access for All network, and we want you to tap it. How can you trust that? How do you know that it's foobar@gmail.com that sent that mail? You don't. You have no way of knowing. It's just ridiculous. They want full traceability of packets. And there's a number of efforts in the ITU and other standards bodies to try to get router manufacturers to implement extra hooks so that you can trace every single packet and everything that's done. Is that proportional? He's making this funny symbol with his hands. I think he wants me to stop. We're almost there, I promise. They also want to ban things like torrents, darknet, Tor, and I know I saw a couple of people with Tor stickers on their laptops, people representing Tor. Tor's got a lot to answer for, it's got a lot of evil going on, but it also does a lot of good to someone. So really, what I would rather see is the government and us asking the government to flip this around. Let's encourage security. Let's not penalize companies and providers and say, hand us unencrypted data. Why aren't we instead mandating the use of strong crypto? Why aren't we making it more difficult for the bad guys to get at our personal information? Why aren't we mandating that outsourcing needs to be controlled in a way that doesn't expose the privacy-sensitive data or secret-sensitive nature of data, if you prefer that, to the entire world? Let's think about doing these things from a positive and encouraging security point of view. Stories like this I won't even talk about. We're not going to talk about this because we're out of time. But you see, like I told you at the very beginning, there was one other thing that I wanted to do. This is my friend. I had a conversation about 2 weeks ago. She's never going to attend an event like this. She barely figured out how to turn on her computer. But this is what she asked me. Is it safe for me to do internet banking? Well, first of all, I was glad that she asked. Second of all, I was sad that she had to ask. That was quickly followed up by, why are the banks closing all their doors? I read in the press about how internet banking is so insecure, and phishing, and these postposeeninvijftig, and all of these things that's like, ooh, 3 keer kloppen, look out, be wary. That's fine. I'll go to a bank branch. Oh, it's closed. Please see our website. That's difficult to explain to someone who just wants to use the internet. This was a really interesting one. She wanted to use Albert Heijn Thuis service where they deliver it to your house, but didn't trust them with the ability to take money from her bank account. Albert Heijn. But this is a good thing for me. The fact that she's thinking this way means that the right questions are getting to the right people. And perhaps the best or worst question was, what's a web browser? God. I don't know if you've seen that YouTube video. I told the organizers I was going to show this. It was an absolutely brilliant thing, and I think it was a Google Chrome advert. Go to YouTube, say Google Chrome web browser, and you'll find people on the streets of New York being asked, what's a web browser? And if you know what it is, it's hilarious. Anyway, so it's a big, scary world. There's lots of stuff that's happening out there that's evil. You are not without power and control. The sky is not falling. Remember that? Ask questions. Don't be fooled by the snake oil of certain vendors with solutions that are out there. Don't just blindly accept what the government wants. Get a Mac. Yeah, there we go. And there's only one other solution, and that solution is burn it all and start over. But that's just not going to happen. So I'm done. The next guy can get up here, and I'm going to go get a beer. Thank you.